Hello, Big Hera again. Time for part 2 of painting our minis. I finished priming the wizard druid the other day, and so he's ready to go. I'm just going to show you a little bit about what I plan on using for the basic painting process. So, for starters, here is our lovely druid mini, and he is painted up. You'll see him better when we do the close-ups, with a white primer. You can see again, as I mentioned, I haven't put the base on them. We are going to be using just your basic hobby paints. There are a lot of different choices, and I'll go over some of those in a minute. But to save time, I thought we'd go ahead and just, dive right into it, and we would get started on the painting. So here we go. Okay, so we are now going to get started with our painting process. I'm going to show you a few of the basic tools that you're going to need. Well, for one thing, of course, you're going to need a mini to paint. There he is, our little guy. And we're going to need a way to hold him. Now, you could just hold him and paint around, but then you always run the risk of getting wet paint onto the dry paint and making a mess, smearing something before it's completely dry. And that's not really what we want to do. So we want to have some way to hold him without interfering with the space that we want to paint. So what I do is I took basically a dowel and I cut it into pieces, and I use this just like a handle. You can see here there's a little bit of this stuff here. This is your best friend. This is poster tack. See, comes in little bars. What we're going to do, we're just going to take a little bit of this. It's reusable. That one happens to be low. Tear off a little blob of it like that. I'll work it in my fingers for just a second to get it a little bit softer. I'm going to stick it on here, a little blob, nothing fancy. Then I'm going to take the bar of his base and I'm just going to stick him in there like that. And you can see now I can hold him and work with it without messing with the paint job. Also lets me get it from different angles. It's just, and I can set it down to let it dry. Very handy. The next thing, of course, we're going to need the paint. A lot of different options for the paint. I have several different brands. I'm going to be showing you a couple that you can choose from. One of the ones that's easiest to find are the Citadel paints. And these are the ones from Games Workshop. And they tend to come in these little flip tops. They've had a lot of different models over the year. This is a gold. They have lots of fancy names. This is Auric Armor Gold. But if you're in a hobby shop that sells minis, chances are you'll see at least some of these paints. Another popular paint you'll see are the Privateer Press, which also come with a little flip top. This is just sort of a khaki brown. This is another pretty good paint. I have several of these. Another popular one comes in a dropper bottle are the Reaper paints. And this is just an off-white, but they make tons of different colors. Also, Vallejo makes paints. These are their game color. They also make a series called Model Color, and they're both good paints. They also make some that are more geared towards airbrushes, but I'm not going to talk about airbrushes. And then these are the paints I'm going to be using today, and these are from a company called the Army Painter, and they're called Warpaints. And I like these fine. They're great for tabletop. They come in a decent selection of colors. I mean, not a huge hundreds and hundreds, but pretty much all the basic colors you're going to need. There's nothing wrong with using some of one brand and some of another. They're all basically acrylic paints. There's no reason you couldn't just use them all. Any combination, whatever the right color is. I just think what I'm going to probably be doing is mostly focusing on one brand, because these are, frankly, these are some of my newer paints, and they are in pretty good shape. Some of my old paints have dried out, so I just don't want to fool with that. Probably going to want a paper towel or two. This is to wipe your brushes on, as well as to dab up things. You're going to need at least one pot of water. I use an old yogurt cup. Actually, I use two. The reason I use two, one is when I need to rinse out the brush from metallic paints, like gold or steel or what have you. And the other is when I need to rinse off non-metallic paints, like browns and greens and things like that. And the reason is the metallic paints have little flecks of metal in them. And those tend to float in the water, and then they will get on your brush, and they will make your non-metallic paints look a little bit shiny. It's not the end of the world, but if you want to just avoid that, it's better to just go ahead and use 2 water cups. I'm also going to be using a palette. This is a really complicated item. In this case, this is just like a Tupperware lid, or the lid from some supermarket. I don't even know what. There are a lot of different choices for palettes. You can use something like an old porcelain tile. You can use what's called a wet palette, which are great. I use one of those quite often, but for right now I'm going to be using this because this is simpler. We'll talk about wet palettes another time. And then, of course, you're going to need your brushes. And there are many, many brands of brushes. For these purposes, I am going to be using some Citadel brushes. Again, a fairly popular brand. You'll find them where you'll find the Citadel paints. And I have the standard. I have what's called a basecoat brush, which is just a little bit bigger with the bristles. Sorry, again, I'm working with the upside down display from the camera, so everything's sort of mirror imaged in vertical. And then I have a detail brush. You can't really see them very well, but there. There we go. You want a nice point on those is what you want. So we have our basic brushes. All right, so let's get started. Take a look at the mini. There he is. And I think I mentioned previously that one of the things I wanted to do is I wanted to try and paint him with some greens and browns and sort of nature colors. So I'm just sort of taking a look here. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to use some greens, I'm going to use some browns. I'm probably going to go ahead and use some yellows, kind of add a little of a sort of an autumn fall feel to it. And for the metallics, I'm probably going to stick to things like bronze and copper and things like that, and less steel and iron, because, you know, it's a druidy kind of a guy. I think he would be more like a Bronze Age sort of a thing. So give me just half a second here and I'll be right back, and we'll start putting paint on this thing.
Now I'm going to take a little bit of the green on the palette and add a drop of water to it to thin the paint. This will help it cover more evenly and spread more smoothly on the mini. I'm using small strokes here, and I'm trying to stay within the area I want green. But if I make a little mistake and slop some paint onto another area, it's no big deal. I'll just touch it up later. A lot of the final stages of the mini painting is cleaning up the fiddly parts that might have gotten a little bit sloppy during the main base coating. I want to keep the brown paint pretty thin here because I want it to get down into the recesses of the hair and beard sculpt. That way there isn't little bits of white peeking out around the brown. For the staff and the handle of the sickle, I'm using oak brown, which is a dark to medium brown, and a pretty good generic wood color. For the tabard, the little cloth bit in the front, I'm going to do sort of an ivory off-white by mixing a bone color with a little bit of pure white. So that way it's not too dark, but it's not just a chalky plain white either.